Yeah, that sounds great, Todd. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just going to assume that you can. If there are audio issues, it's probably more efficient if people just drop that into the chat box, so that it's a less of a back and forth amongst everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the resident emailer of the Charleston SABR chapter, who tries to at least keep everyone apprised of what's going on as our chapter tries to stay active in these strange times we're trying to cope with. As many of you saw in the email that I most recently sent, we have a pretty simple agenda here that I think is pretty straightforward. Professor McDorman, who's, as I think one of the other attendees mentioned, has graciously offered his services for today to present, I guess the title of this presentation is Nobody's Perfect, which, as he references the social critic Kenneth Burke's perspective on perfection, this might have a little bit of a philosophical tone, but also going into the specific examples of the build-up and aftermath, and just the overall discussion surrounding instant replay and perfection and what it means to the human element of umpiring in baseball and its importance to the sport. And then after the presentation, we'll have a little chance to chat with Professor McDorman about just about any questions that might have come up based on his talk. And then Andrew Reinbold, another one of our chapter members, will handle the trivia section of that. And then I guess because this is a unique type of meeting or gathering we're having today, that'll wrap things up, unless there's people who want to banter and stick around. Obviously, you can also do so in the chat box or directly message anyone else. Without going any further, I think it's a good idea to hand it off to Professor McDorman, who's going to present on Nobody's Perfect, about Armando Galarraga's umpiring and about instant replay. So thank you so much, Professor McDorman, and go right ahead.
Great, thanks, Trent. Thank you. Yeah, and I go by Todd. That would be perfectly fine, but I appreciate it. It can be a little odd to present in this format. It can be feel a little bit like speaking into a void. So again, you can give some indications in the chat, which at times I'll probably be able to see. At other times I may not, about how things are going. I think this should be roughly 20 minutes in length. I'm presenting here in my Crosley Field seats, so I have a baseball theme there, and I've got many of my bobbleheads here in the background as I create a little bit of an atmosphere. I see that in some of your backgrounds as well. I see that with Noel in particular there, and the different decorations that he has. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and my PowerPoint should come up when I do that. Okay, you should have a couple different viewing options. Normally, at least on my screen, it's along the top, and you can probably arrange things so that you primarily see the PowerPoint, so you primarily see me, or you get a gallery view of everyone in attendance. Normally, when I listen to presentations of the students, I kind of swap back and forth between those different options. I can't see, I notice now that I've done this, I can't see the chat in this format. I can see you all, but I'm not at this point seeing the chat comment. So I may need to have some help being drawn attention to those while this is up. So this project is one I started with a Wabash student back when he was an undergraduate. That student is now finishing his PhD. It's a version of a presentation I did last year at the Baseball Hall of Fame at their annual Cooperstown Symposium, and a longer version of it will appear in the biennial book that they do coming out of that, the Cooperstown Symposium anthology. The genesis for the presentation was my first trip to Cooperstown in 2010, and after the day's events on Wednesday, June 2nd, my father and I were watching baseball in our hotel room. I was very fortunate that my dad was able to go on that trip as well. We had a great time visiting Cooperstown together for the first time. We were first surprised that evening by the sudden announcement of Ken Griffey Jr. that he was retiring immediately. But as the night progressed, it became more notable for Armando Galarraga's effort to complete a perfect game. As you undoubtedly know, when facing Jason Donald, Cleveland's 27th and would-be final batter, Galarraga gave up a ground ball to the right side that was fielded by first baseman Miguel Cabrera. He tossed back over to Galarraga, who was covering first base, beating Donald by a half a step. However, veteran umpire Jim Joyce ruled that Donald was safe. Replay soon confirmed what Tigers on the field initially thought, that the runner was out, that Joyce had made a mistake. Keep in mind, this was before instant replay of calls at the bases. In response, Galarraga offered kind of a shrug and maybe partially of a slight smile, but he didn't protest the call. Instead, he went back to the mound and completed the one-hit shutout of victory. So in this presentation, as Trent alluded to, we adopt a 20th century social critic named Kenneth Burke. We adopt his perspective on the idea of perfection and what he calls the tragic frame and the comic frame. I'll explain those terms, but I won't use them a whole lot. And we use those concepts to analyze the outpouring of media coverage that followed Galarraga's near-perfect game, as well as baseball's current instant replay system. So I'll first outline Burke's perspective on perfection, comedy, and tragedy. Then I'll give some analysis of varying media accounts of the Galarraga game that reflect tragedy and comedy. And then I close with considerations of baseball's expanded use of instant replay. So those are the three segments here. Those are the three segments. Are we still on board? We can still hear okay. Get a thumbs up from Ryan. Okay, and Steve as well. I only get a few of the visions here. So ultimately, the argument that we make is that Galarraga's and Joyce's responses to perfection lost provide a valuable way to understand the limitations of perfection and the potential risks of technological perfection through instant replay. Or to summarize, contrition and grace are good. Vitriol and nitpicky replay are bad. That's the 10-second translation. So an interest running through Kenneth Burke's work is humankind's obsession with perfection and our inevitable failure to achieve it. And when we are something less than perfect, we normally have feelings of guilt. We didn't do as well as we wanted to. At the end of this presentation, I'll name 10 things that didn't go as well as I wanted them to, right? And you feel guilty because you didn't do your best or you weren't perfect. Burke suggests that there are two primary ways that we can respond to that imperfection. One is to adopt a perspective he calls the tragic frame. And in that perspective, we tend to absolve our guilt through victimization and scapegoating. We find people and objects that we can blame, and we feel better because there's someone other than us that's responsible. So the tragic frame victimizes and scapegoats others. Burke prefers a different approach, something he calls the comic perspective, and it emphasizes humility and compassion instead. It recognizes that no one is perfect, that we can be mistaken without being vicious or corrupt or criminal. And just by transcending and forgiving, we can move past our guilt. So if the tragic frame bemoans human failings and seeks a scapegoat as a result, then the comic frame reminds us that to err is, after all, fundamentally human. So in this analysis, we looked at 119 different media accounts. These were examples of game reporting, columns and reactions, and editorials that addressed the Galarraga game. We offer a thematic analysis of the dominant rhetorical frames. So what is it that we see most frequently within those responses? We found two competing views of the Galarraga game appearing at almost equal frequency. One view reflects the tragic frame and how it perceives perfection lost and attempts to remedy the situation through victimization. But the other view is more representative of the comic frame and its understanding of Joyce's call and the lessons that it seeks to find within it. Collectively, we think the responses show or provide a window into our preoccupation with perfection and how we seek to address guilt when we fail to achieve it. There were 4 primary tragic perspectives on the lost perfection of the game. The most common was the scapegoat Jim Joyce. Second, about a quarter of the responses advocated for expanded replay, trying to find technological perfection. Third, many wanted to make the game perfect, have us go back and retroactively call it perfect. And then finally, a number of the responses sought to scapegoat Bud Selig and make him responsible, victimize Selig for what happened on the field. So first, about 1/3 of the articles attributed the loss of perfection to Joyce in a manner that cast him as guilty rather than simply mistaken. Most frequently, more than 25 times, Joyce was deemed to have blown the call. Other accounts refer to him as having cost, ruined, spoiled, robbed, or stolen a perfect game. For example, writing in the New York Times, Tyler Kepner termed Joyce's mistake easily the most egregious blown call in baseball over the last 25 years, while Mike Lupica said Joyce robbed Galarraga of a perfect game with a call a Little League umpire wouldn't have missed. Such characterizations reflect the tragic frame in that they assign guilt to Joyce. Furthermore, when terms like robbed and stolen are used, words that constitute a crime, they cast Joyce as malicious in his action. The public also soon began scapegoating Joyce after the television broadcast reported that he grew up in nearby Toledo. A different Jim Joyce, who still lived in the city, reported that he received more than 40 angry calls. He conveyed the experience to journalists saying, everybody was pretty irate. A lot of them said vulgar things. Moreover, umpire Jim Joyce had his Wikipedia entry vandalized, experienced the launch of both a Facebook page and a website named Fire Jim Joyce. That's where this image comes from. And along with his family, he actually received death threats. In addition to the accounts that used victimage to scapegoat Joyce and purge the guilt of lost perfection, about 1/4 of the accounts advocated for expanded instant replay so that we could achieve technological perfection. For example, esteemed broadcaster Bob Costas weighed in saying, there is no excuse that technology exists and a 7th umpire should be on site to review the calls. Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News said it's just backward to not use replay, and failing to do so was simply lazy. And an editorial from the USA Today effectively summarized the broader viewpoint when they wrote in their opening, if there were any lingering doubts that baseball should use instant replay, then surely they must have died in Detroit on Wednesday night. So extended replay is advanced as a method to purge the guilt from the Joyce call and prevent another denial of perfection. A third tragic view was to call the game perfect, fix it, correct it. In this, about 20% of the media accounts advocated that Commissioner Selig should retroactively award Galarraga the perfect game because he was, in fact, perfect in their estimation. As with expanded replay, this suggestion seeks to redact human error, and it reflects a desire on our part to control perfection. For example, the USA Today called for expanded replay and that the new policy be made retroactive to correct Joyce's call. Mike Lupica said that Selig should have found a way to give Galarraga the perfect game he had earned, such as by invoking the best interest in the game. Paul Clemens wrote in the New York Times that Galarraga threw a perfect game, though the record books won't acknowledge it. And the Washington Post added, it was a perfect game in every sense that holds meaning. The focus here is on the canonization of the game as perfect. In doing so, we contend, ignores the game's unique factors that stand to make it, much like Harvey Haddock's 12 perfect innings in 1959, a novel occurrence that supersedes even the label of perfection. As an example of the game's status in this regard, it is still represented at the Hall of Fame in their One for the Books exhibit, where it preserves the story of the game and its unique occurrence. It isn't one of just 20, 21, 22 perfect games. It's a singular experience that we can reflect upon if we're willing to let go of the tragic perspective. A final tragic perspective is expressed in responses that scapegoated Bud Selig for not awarding the perfect game and for failing to have already having not introduced instant replay. So once Joyce apologized and that apology was accepted by Galarraga, Joyce wasn't a very inviting enemy, and that left Selig as the target of opportunity. The USA Today wrote that Selig was the culprit. It's because of him that Joyce was stuck. Al Newhorth said Selig should be called out and argued he had held his job for too long. Daily News editors asked him to come to his limited senses, and Woody Page accused Selig of offering a reaction that was a combination of Beavis and Butthead. As with other tragic frame perspectives, by scapegoating Selig, Galarraga's message, which we argue is more important and more valuable, is overlooked and minimized. Ultimately, the point is that these accounts adopting the tragic frame mainly saw the game as spoiled and expressed anger and frustration, missing the value of the game that might be derived from Joyce's contrition and Galarraga's grace in accepting the error. So although tragic framing was frequently represented, almost an equal number of accounts offered discourse that was reflective of the comic frame. Again, we found 4 themes in the 119 media analyses we looked at. About a fifth of these praised the episode for its sportsmanship. The most frequently noted theme was Joyce's contrition, his contrite mortification. About a third praised Galarraga for his forgiveness. And about a fifth of them talked about the game symbolizing baseball's imperfect beauty. I'm going to talk about the first 3 briefly. I'm going to omit the 4th one for time. So because of what happened following the game, the imperfect outcome came to symbolize the value of sportsmanship in baseball and society. Shortly after the game concluded, Joyce confirmed that he was mistaken in his safe call, and he sought out Galarraga to apologize. In turn, rather than criticize Joyce, Galarraga expressed compassion and understanding for Joyce's mistake. Such events made victimizing Joyce less palatable, and instead about 20% of the accounts addressed the game for its show of sportsmanship. In the New York Times, Kepner wrote that Galarraga's response sets a great example for children, and as a Little League coach, I'll be using his example of sportsmanship. Writing in Sports Illustrated, Tom Verducci said, Armando Galarraga lost a place in history, but he and Jim Joyce gave us something sweeter, a lesson in sportsmanship. The shift in discourse caused Joyce to remark that an ugly situation has turned into a very big positive, and I couldn't be more thankful. The most prevalent theme found in the responses was a focus on Joyce's mortification and his obvious contrition for his error. Rather than defending his call or blaming his mistake on some other factor, Joyce accepted responsibility. Joyce's admission was an act of transcendence that made him noble and praiseworthy rather than an object of scorn. According to Galarraga, when Joyce approached him after the game, Joyce hugged me right away, not even one word, before saying, "Lo siento, I'm sorry," and beginning to cry. In speaking with reporters, Joyce provided the single most reported aspect of the situation, 46% of the sample, when he said, "I just cost that kid a perfect game." Joyce's self-blame was important in shifting the perspective of the situation, but Galarraga's act of forgiveness completed the comic framing. 44 accounts praised Galarraga's grace and composure. After receiving Joyce's post-game apology, Galarraga told reporters, "Nobody's perfect, everybody's human. I give a lot of credit to that guy saying, 'I need to talk to you,' and really saying, 'I'm sorry.'" Galarraga absolved Joyce of guilt and offered forgiveness. "I don't have any problems with him in my heart." Galarraga viewed Joyce as mistaken rather than evil and enacted the comic frame by taking a charitable view and forgiving Joyce. Despite the show of humanity after the Galarraga game, several media accounts presently referred to it as the tipping point for expansion of instant replay, which was fully implemented in 2014. In 2010, baseball's replay rules only allowed review of home runs, balls leaving the playing field, and fan interference. But today, nearly 90% of baseball situations are eligible for replay review, theoretically using a standard of clear and convincing evidence on whether or not to overrule a call. To baseball's credit, the system has improved dramatically since its inception, decreasing the time devoted to decision making and improving the technology. While today's reviews overturn clearly missed calls, they also prompt frame-by-frame considerations that prioritize technological perfection, risk losing sight of the required standard for overturning calls, and subordinate human judgment. I want to close by talking about two examples that capture what I'm concerned about here. An illustrative example of how replay has promoted a tragic, absolutist view of on-field action is a contested fan interference call from the 2018 American League Championship Series. You may recall that on the play, Boston's Mookie Betts leapt at the wall in an effort to catch a drive from Houston's Jose Altuve. However, just as Betts reached for the ball, so did a cluster of fans in the front row. In the tumult, glove and hands collided and the ball fell into the stands, except umpire Joe West ruled fan interference. Under replay, the call stood due to insufficient evidence to overturn it. It was impossible to say what had happened for sure. Clear and convincing evidence did not exist. The umpire's call was not clearly erroneous. However, in our quest for technologically aided perfection, we seem reticent to adopt the comic frame toward human judgment that allows for even the possibility that we could be mistaken. For instance, on TBS's post-game show, former slugger turned analyst Gary Sheffield termed the call the most egregious play I've ever seen. For me, to term a call that was analyzed nearly frame by frame and still so close that it was impossible to know what had happened egregious is symbolic not only of what replay hasn't fixed, but the emboldened absolutism and lack of humility that is encouraged in the way that we contest calls in this technological terrain. A second recurring situation that underscores the tragedy of technological perfection involves instances when a runner momentarily loses contact with a base during the process of completing a slide. By all natural evaluation, the runner initially looks safe, but Zapruder-like analysis sometimes reveals this moment when a runner and the base break contact while the glove is still applied. Such was the case for Kansas City's Terrence Gore in the 2015 American League Division Series. In this particular play, when it was replayed enough times, one could see that Gore's foot probably left the bag. It did leave the bag for a fraction of a second. Because of that, one could reasonably determine that Gore was out, although I struggle to see how the game is improved by correcting calls that we never would have previously questioned. Bob Costas, who also criticized baseball's lack of replay in the wake of the Joyce call, has now complained that this sort of micromanaging is ridiculous and outside the spirit of the rule. I would agree. For me, it's the height of tragedy to actively seek out evidence of imperfection in calls where it isn't otherwise observed. It would be hyperbole to claim replay is ruining baseball. I don't feel that way. But it seems possible to correct clearly mistaken calls, including Jim Joyce's safe call of Jason Donald, without engaging in the pursuit of technological perfection. A single viewing of the Donald play, even at regular speed, would identify the mistake and allow for a reversal of the call. Replay that corrects mistakes, rather than replay that actively seeks out alternate possibilities, has the prospect of preserving the integrity of the game without technological servitude. If a call is anything less than certainly mistaken, it should stand. Ideally, that would not take frame-by-frame analysis, where the most minute movements are used to determine a play. Rather than pursuing a false projection of perfection, we could encourage an alternate practice of human relations that more fully embraces the virtues and benefits of the comic perspective. Galarraga and Joyce provide a compelling example which can teach us that perfection is not everything, that guilt can be cleansed without scapegoating, and that comedy can counteract tragedy. We would do well to remember the words of Armando Galarraga: nobody's perfect. Okay. I saw there were several comments during it. I couldn't track the comments with the PowerPoint up. I'm hopeful that you could hear most of that as it gets a nod. That's a good sign. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to have you discuss with each other. You can unmute your mic and ask. You can type something in the chat box. Whatever you might like to do.
Well, Todd, I've got one thing that I might give you. I'm going to switch hats for a second, just coming at it from the umpire perspective. So just a quick overview, and I mean, I can see how easily this happened. So first of all, umpires, you're aware of what's going on in the game. He fully knew the pressure, and I'm sure Joyce's heart was probably beating out of his chest too, knowing what was about to happen or could happen. And especially since he knew most likely the play was going to come to first base. So just stepping through what happens on that play, ball's hit, it's on the ground, it's on the first base side. He's reading it, stepping into fair territory to read where that's going to be. He knows it's going to be first base or second baseman getting the ball. So he's only coming a step or two into fair from the line. And as soon as he sees a clean release from the fielder going toward the base, he fixates on that base. One thing that I've always noticed with that play is that as an umpire, you can't look at two things at the same time. You're looking at the base, and we're taught to look directly at the base first and listen for the ball hitting the glove. Well, at this play, soft toss coming over to first, if Joyce is staring at first base, he's going to be reading and listening for the sound of that ball hitting glove, which he probably isn't going to hear, especially with the crowd and the perfect game about to happen. So my heart breaks every time I see that for Joyce. I know that I kicked the first call I ever made at a Brebeuf game. First time I was ever working bases, a play at first base, I kicked it. So my heart breaks for him and just seeing what happens there. But I thought it might be interesting to share what he was doing positionally at that time. And when you watch that back in real time, by the time he reads that foot hitting the base and he's looking for the ball and trying to read the ball, it's real quick. And on replay, we can all kind of take it in from a distance. For Joyce, he didn't have that. But the way he reacted has always been something that I've held as an umpire. He immediately came out and said, look, I kicked that call. That's on me. And he didn't have the God complex that some of the umpires tend to have.
Yeah. I'm curious of your perspective on replay. I've picked up in the meetings the last year and a half your involvement with umpiring. Yeah, as an umpire, what kind of thoughts do you have?
I like replay. I think in most cases it fixes that. The Don Deckinger call, the Jim Joyce call, where there's a clear play that has a historic ramification that you can fix it quickly. I think I agree with you that it's gone too far. And with HD TV, super high def, frame by frame, where you're looking at thousandths of a second, it's gone too far. You should almost look at the replay in real time. And if you can't tell, watching from multiple angles in real time enough to overcall, let it stand. Because I'm with you. It drives me nuts when you see someone slide into second and you couldn't slide a piece of paper between their foot and the base, and the foot goes back down, and then they rule out because for 0.02 of a second his foot was off, and that's not what it's about. But I think so. I don't know that there's a way you could police it, because with technology they could always pause it. Mm-hmm. But ideally, I would say watch the replays back in real time and make your decision there.
Great. In the Deckinger call, it was the play that is most frequently offered as a comparison in the media accounts. We talk about that in the longer paper, but I didn't reference it here.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yes, please.
My name's Tom Blessing, by the way. You may recognize the surname. I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'm in the SABR Club in Fort Wayne. My brother did invite me into the meeting here. Excellent presentation, Todd. I am really struck by the fact that Armando Galarraga and Jim Joyce, for that matter, who, by the way, was an incredibly difficult author to read and understand. Joyce actually made history because of the error. There have been several perfect games, and I forget some of them, okay? Armando Galarraga lost a perfect game because of an umpire's call. So that's unique. Along with Harvey Haddix, who lost it because the game, his team couldn't score a run, basically. So they are unique. And then the way that Galarraga responded to it and the way Joyce responded to it is so exemplary that I think that's what made Galarraga in baseball. I mean, he never did anything else as a player, right? That was the only time he did anything, was a perfect game. But yet, his example, I don't know what he's doing today, but I think his example stands out. Plus, it had that impact on instant replay. So that, they actually contributed more by what happened, I think, than if they would have just called it correctly and he'd have just been another person to have a perfect game and never do anything else. He'd be the Bobo Holloman, probably, of Tigers. Right? What do you got?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Now Denkener's call is different though than Joyce's, because Denkener probably almost certainly cost the St. Louis Cardinals a World Series. And I don't know that he ever apologized or anything. I can't recall what his response was.
Yeah, I can't remember all the details. He was very embarrassed, is my recollection. He's eventually invited back to St. Louis.
Wabash.
Oh, good morning. He's eventually invited back to St. Louis for some recognition of that team. And I think he got some closure through it. I know I read a couple of accounts during the course of this. I also believe he came out in favor of replay because he could relate to what Joyce was going through and how he didn't wish that on anyone. That's my recollection, although it's been a while since I've read those accounts.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody thinks of the Kansas City Royals as the two-time World Series champions. They would only been a one-time champion had it not been for that one call. And the Cardinals have won so many times that, frankly, I was glad to see Kansas City win that. So that's a huge difference. But instant replay, obviously, to me, at least, instant replay has enhanced the game, made it much better, despite the fact, like the Betts call, that you got some close calls that, even instant replay can't really determine for sure. Do y'all agree, or are there any purists out there that think whatever the umpire says, that's it, and forget the cameras?
Well, I'm going to step back and go from a different level just to say that at the high school level and youth baseball, instant replay has given people and especially coaches, a perception that that you can't live up to. There was a travel game I worked last fall where a play at seconds, I'm in B, slot over, stolen base, and runner is sliding into second base. Ball is low, goes under the runner, skips up, is caught by the second baseman, who immediately brings a glove up. And of course, I don't see anything except the runner slide into the base because all the action is happening behind the runner, and this is a two-man crew. So there's a plate umpire and there's me. And the coach comes out as I rule the runner safe, and he says, how can you rule him safe? The second baseman tagged him on the back as he was sliding in. And the perception of how you're going to be able to see through a body as a fielder, maybe he got him, maybe he didn't, on a what was not a good throw that actually goes under the runner, you can only call what you can see. So there is that perception now of perfection, and where we've actually had to say, look, we don't have replay, we don't have cameras here. We can only call what we see and stay with it. So I think the replay has affected how people see baseball in the lower levels. I am certainly in favor of replay or limited replay at the major league level.
If I could chime in, this is Andrew speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'd just like to add to what Noel just said. I'm all for getting it right. So I do think that replay was a valuable addition to the game for getting it right and creating a fair playing atmosphere. But like so many advents in history, the pendulum has swung way too far. There's no way an umpire can call what he can't see, to include the 2,000ths of a second that the guy's off the base, or the laces of of the fielder's glove brushing against the runner's shoe, which no human eyeball can see. So we've swung too far with the pursuit of getting it right, and we've undermined the authorities on the field. The farther this goes, the more they'll continue to be undermined. And I fear that's what's driving the call for the push for robotic umps and automated strike zones and all this stuff that may satisfy a small segment of fans. I don't think it's going to satisfy a majority of fans. Technology and all of the things that have come along in the last decade or more, and we could get off on the sabermetrics things, and I won't do that, but it's made the game, it's added an element of unpredictability to the game. And I don't know anybody who wants to watch a game that's predictable. I think I just misstated what I meant to say. It's added an element of predictability, more so that did not exist prior to all this, and it's getting exacerbated. The problem, I think, though, is the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't know where or how we can strike a balance in our efforts to get it right as often as possible without undermining the officials and the authorities and the spirit of the game and the spirit of the rule.
That view, I think, is captured at least partly in the part I omitted, that I saw there was a comment that wanted to hear something about that and the notion of baseball's imperfect
Yes, I did.
beauty.
Mm-hmm.
That about 20% of the responses reflected the last part of what Andrew said there, and that the notion that baseball is fallible, mistakes happen. I'll just share two quotations. One's from John Romano of the St. Petersburg Times. He argued mistakes have been part of this game for more than 100 years. Legislating them away would not be progress. And the USA Today editorial rhetorically asked, can't we keep something that tolerates plain old human fallibility? What? And the notion in a number of these accounts was the idea that the mistakes just happen, and it's just part of what we should deal with and be okay with.
Yeah. Yeah, can I say something here? What Andrew said?
We'll try to get Ronnie then. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, so I said go ahead, and then we'll go to Ronnie. If that's
okay. Okay, what you said, Andrew, about, I mean, my understanding is with instant replay today, that only if, in the opinion of, I don't know, whoever judges it, only if the mistake, was, the call was clearly wrong, do they reverse it. If it's close at all, they go with the umpire's call, I think, which I think is exactly what they should do. So I don't think you really take the umpire out of it. I mean, can you imagine if we had computers doing this, and we had even cameras back in the early part of the 20th century? How many games, how many winners would be different today than actually back then? How many balls would be strikes or strikes would be balls? I mean, you can't imagine. It'd be interesting to take perfection and run a computer program and then find out who the real winners were of some of those games back a century ago. But now we've got the technology to get rid of the egregious calls, the Denkingers and the Joyces, and get those umpires off the hook. Mm-hmm. So I think it's excellent that we have that.
Well, yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I just fear, well, you heard what I said, but I agree with what you just said also. Yeah, I'm for getting it right. Yeah.
Ronnie, it looked like you had a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of wanted to back up, and since the issue is, what role can the technology contribute, and consider the difference between human vision and technology vision, okay? We don't see 60 cycles a second. right? So we've got lights even in Europe at 50 cycles a second, and we see it as on. We don't see each individual cycling on and off. And most people don't even realize that their lights around them are cycling. So it would seem that a limit that one might want to consider for the technology is that anything the technology can see that's beyond 50 or 60 cycles a second, like 1,000, 200 or whatever, is out of range. And put a limit on if a human can't see it, then it doesn't matter if the camera can. And have that as some kind of a guideline for deciding, where to draw the line. And that eliminates a lot of, well, I think this and I think that, because it just says, okay, either we can all see it when it's played back to us at, normal speed or whatever, or we can't. And if we can't, well, then the call would have to stand.
That sounds reasonable to me. And I'm not this big anti-technology Luddite, right? I think there's some balance, there's some limit that I think expressed there. What you're saying, Ronnie, what I heard Noel say as well.
Well, and
go ahead, please.
Todd, I work with, I mean, the research that I do, I work with high-speed camera and motion capture and slow motion and so on. And I know that we can see things, when we slow it down that we don't see at normal speed. And that's great for research, but I'm not sure it's good for baseball.
I guess, and I'm troubled as much by kind of the attitude that we adopt about it sometimes, that we just absolutely have to get it right, and we lose sight of the possibility that there just may not be one single right answer. And then at some point to accept that, as opposed to vilifying people who made a call or made a decision. And so that's an angle that bothers me. Well, and that's not necessarily just about replay. That's just kind of about human reactions to decisions they don't like. But that's another angle. Any final thoughts? I know Andrew's got some trivia for us as well. Well, I appreciate your feedback and your comments.
I have to say it's unfair to blame people like Deckinger because people forget that was game 6 of the 85 series. And it was a leadoff single in the 9th. I mean, the Royals were still down 1, and they still had to win game 7. Game 7. Who knows what it would have come down to? The same with Steve Bartman and the fan interference call in the 03 NLCS in game 6. Mm-hmm. So it's just ridiculous. This was a special game because this one play would have determined it, and they should go back and make it perfect. They should.
I hear your point about the singularity of this play as in contrast to Deckinger, Bartman. I'd throw the Bill Buckner play in there as well, that there are a whole series of events and things that happen afterwards that distinguish those from this particular call where this was the final element of the game. And I can see why you can make a distinction there.
One last thing before we go on. The one thing that I think that's a little bit outside of this, but the fact that baseball, and I know Fay Vincent went in to try and clean up the record books and decided that they would dictate what was a perfect game and what wasn't, and that's when Haddock's game was dropped. I think in some ways baseball shouldn't be involved with determining what is a technical perfect game or not. Let it be discussed, because so much, as we all know while we're in SABR, the discussion of Haddock's game versus a 9-inning versus a 7-inning rain-shortened perfect game, what's the better outing? Let something like that be out there for the fans, and the baseball doesn't need to create a permanent list. Let the Hall of Fame do that. Let journalists, let books, sports writers take that on. But I don't think baseball needs to maintain that list. And then we'd be having that discussion. And I like what was said earlier, that because of this play and because of the way both of them reacted to it, we'll remember it far longer than most other perfect games. Even though it's the imperfect game and that base is in the Hall of Fame. There's no way that Galarraga makes it into the Hall of Fame, even in an exhibit, without this, since he was fighting for a rotation spot at the time. So I think that's the magic of baseball. You get these fluke games that we will all remember and all debate and discuss, and that's what made this one something that we'll never forget.
Yeah, and you point out that the definition of a perfect game, I don't remember what year that happened. He said it was during Vincent's tenure.
Yeah.
The definition changed, and suddenly a few that had been deemed perfect no longer were. I want to say Pedro Martinez may have lost one in there as well, but I can't quite recall.
I think prior to Harvey Haddock's, which was what, 1958 or 9 or
59.
59. Prior to Harvey Haddock's, the last perfect game other than Larson's game in the series was 1922, Charlie Robertson. So we went, what, 30-some years, there was no perfect game, and there have been quite a few since then, since 1959.
I believe today's the anniversary of Dallas Braden's perfect game. I think I saw that on Twitter earlier today.
I forgot he did that.
We're going to see a lot more of them going forward, too. Fielding has gotten so much better, and there are so many fewer balls put in play that we're going to see perfect games increase and increase. Whereas someone who plays 19th century baseball, it's hard to go an inning without an error, much less a game.
Except for one thing, Noel, it's hard to see a pitcher go 9 innings anymore today.
That's also true. That is also true.
They'll be taken out for the relief pitcher.
So we'll see a lot more combined perfect games.
With a perfect game.
There we go.
Andrew, I believe a couple minutes ago I gave you co-hosting privileges. I think you should be able to share your screen now. Do you see that ability?
Yes, I do. Does everybody see this photograph?
I
Yes, we
do, with the batter with the mask, yes.
We'll see a lot of that coming up.
Yeah, this is from the We've Been Here Before department. Although none of us at this meeting, I'll dare say, remember when this photograph was taken, but let me start by saying that I'm gonna, I don't know if everybody has had the same experience that I've had during this meeting. There's been several times when the audio has cut out and I've missed large swaths of what someone had to say. The video's never cut out. But with that in mind, I think what I'm going to do is, well, let me just tell you, I've got 9 questions, 9 being the perfect baseball number. I've cut it down from the normal 10. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flash a slide for each question. And in case someone does lose their video, I will read the question and the choices. Everything is multiple choice this time around. Everybody get your pen and pad ready so you can score at home, score yourself. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to give out prizes this time around like we normally do. So the winner, you'll be bestowed with bragging rights.
Here's mine from last time. Thanks, Ronnie.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll flash each question and I'll allow about, I don't know, 30 to 45 seconds after I read it for everybody to absorb the question, think about it, write down their answers. When I get through all 9 questions, if there's anybody that did miss something because of audio or video or whatever, let me know. We can jump back to that slide. And then when it's clear that we can go forward, then I'll flash the slides with the answers. And if anybody has any input, questions, comments, whatever, that'll be the time to do it. So we'll get ready. We'll go. Question number 1, who was the last major leaguer to hit a home run at the age of 18? Andrew Jones, Robin Yount, Ken Griffey Jr., Gary Sheffield. Each question is going to be worth a total of 10 points, so a perfect score will be 90. I should have said that to begin. Okay, I'll move on to question 2. Just 2 players joined the 3,000 hit club by hitting a triple. Who were they? Roberto Clemente and Lou Brock, Ty Cobb and George Brett, Craig Biggio and Ricky Henderson, Paul Molitor and Ichiro Suzuki. Okay, I'm getting a signal on, or a message on my screen saying my internet connection is unstable. Anybody having audio video problems so far with all this?
Nope, we still hear you.
Okay, very good. Question number 3. Only 2 switch hitting major leaguers have ever recorded 100 hits from each side of the plate in a single season. The most recent was Willie Wilson in 1980. Who was the first? Reggie Smith, Pete Rose, Gary Templeton, Ken Singleton. And I guess I'll go ahead and say right now, if during the process of going through these first 9 slides, if anybody wants me to jump back, go ahead and say the word. I guess we might as well do that too. Okay, question number 4. Baseball Digest recorded a first in its 79-year history when it featured who on the cover of its May-June 2020 issue? An umpire, the commissioner, a minor league player, women in major league uniforms. Okay, question 5. Among Hall of Fame players, there are more pitchers than any other position. Which of the other 8 fielding positions has the fewest representatives? The fewest. Catcher, left fielder, second baseman, third baseman. Okay, question number 6. The late Hall of Famer Al Kaline once wondered aloud to a reporter that he may have wasted his years playing baseball and may have pursued which profession instead? Doctor, politician, teacher, firefighter. Okay, anybody need to go back? Can everybody still hear and see?
Yep.
Okay. Question number 7, 7th inning. Which current major league club is the only one never to have a pitcher throw a no-hitter? The Blue Jays, the Padres, the Rays, or the Rockies? Okay, 8th question. This year's Hall of Fame induction ceremony has been postponed to 2021. Yet the class of 42 never enjoyed a ceremony at all due to wartime travel restrictions. Who was the lone inductee that year? Rogers Hornsby, Mordecai Brown, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, or Roger Bresnahan? Okay, anybody need to go back? Everybody still good? This is the last question coming up. It's a multi-parter, and I'd be remiss if I did not include this question in this particular meeting. Question number 9. 100 years ago this month, the first pitch of the Negro National League was thrown in Indianapolis. The ABCs hosted the Chicago American Giants in a doubleheader on Sunday, May 2. Take 2 points if you name which team won the first game. Take another 2 points if you name which team won the second game. Take 2 points if you can name the ballpark. Take 4 points for a total of 10 if you know the final score of either game. I'll allow a little extra time on this one, and then we can either go back or we can press forward. In case you didn't hear that, if I cut out, I'll say it again. I'll allow a few more seconds, and then we can either go back or we can press forward. We reached the end of the quiz.
I'm ready. I don't think I did as well this time.
Okay, well, are we ready to, anybody want to go back and recover any question?
I'm good.
Okay, then we'll press forward. All right, question number 1. Who was the last major leaguer to hit a home run at the age of 18? Robin Yount.
Yeah.
Noel, did you get that one?
I did, and I've got his bat. His bat sitting up there above the county stadium picture, so, and the county stadium seats. So
I would have been disappointed had you not.
I wasn't sure.
In fact, he hit 3.
I honestly wasn't sure if it was Yount or Griffey, but I was going to put Yount for some. No matter what the answer was, I was going to write down Yount.
Well, okay. Well, let me just say, I flashed up there. I hope you can see it. He hit 3 in all of 1974, and they all came before his birthday in September. Everybody else on that list was 19 when they hit their home run. Yount was not the first man to do it. He is the last man to do it. Okay, next question. Question number 2. Who hit a triple? Who were the only 2 guys to hit a triple to get their 3,000th hit?
Well, I know Molitor was one of them.
Molitor and Suzuki.
We're done with Brewers, so I'm in trouble now.
Okay, question number 3. Who are the only 2 switch hitters to get 100 hits from each side of the plate? Well, I'm sorry, there's been 2. Last one was Willie Wilson. Who was the first man to do it? The choices were Smith, Rose, Templeton, and Singleton. If you said Gary Templeton, you are correct. I had to throw Rose in there. I just had to do that. Interestingly, Mickey Mantle never did it either.
It's got to be hard to get enough at bats righty if you're switch hitter. You'd have to face a whole lot of lefties.
And we were talking about the demise of starting pitching. There's not that many switch hitters around anymore either.
Templeton also didn't walk very much, which played to his strength there. You know, he hit at the top of the order, and he didn't walk, and so he had more opportunities in that regard.
Yeah.
There are still a lot of switches around. They just tend to congregate in large cities.
That's a discussion for another day.
Well, we'll see in a few years. My son's been working on switch hitting. He's doing pretty well in the cages, but he hasn't tried it in the game yet.
Let's go to question number 4 if we're ready. The answer was women in Major League uniforms. Interesting. I did some. I went back and looked at every single Baseball Digest cover since 1942. This issue is not the first time a woman has appeared on the cover of Baseball Digest, but it is the first time. It's only the third time in history, but the first time in Major League uniforms. The new coaches for the Giants and the Yankees, which if we ever get around to playing baseball again, we've been told they will be in uniform. Anybody got a perfect score yet?
So far.
Wow.
Yes? Okay, we got somebody with 40. All right, question number 5. Question number 5, the fewest positions represented at the Hall of Fame, third baseman. There's only 17. Catchers, there's only 19. Left field is tied with center field at 21. And second baseman, there are only 20 second basemen. And this is including this year's inductees, which includes Ted Simmons as a catcher. Outfielders make up the majority of, there's 83 pitchers, just in case you're interested. Outfielders tend to be broken down by position. However, there are 5 individuals inducted with outfielder as their position, which is why I worded this as 8 fielding positions to distinguish. And now, depending on who you talk to, designated hitter is considered a position. There's 2 of them now. So 17 third basemen, which is kind of surprising. Question number 6. What would Al Kaline might have been had he not spent all of his time playing baseball? His answer was a doctor. He, in an article I read not too long ago, Ira Burkow of the New York Times recounted a conversation he had with Kaline in the dugout. And Kaline kind of wondered if playing baseball was what he could have contributed best to society, or could he have done something else that would have contributed more to society. But at the same time, he had a lot of fun playing baseball. It gave him his biggest thrill, and we all know what kind of a baseball player he was. In case you didn't know what kind of a human being Al Kaline was, I would recommend reading a biography that was published last year. I can't tell you the name of the author right now, but he was, in my opinion, he was one of the best human beings that ever played Major League Baseball. Okay, number 7, the only club never to have thrown a no-hitter, San Diego Padres. Every one of the other teams listed there in the choices has thrown 1. And by the way, just until I think 2017, the last year that Sean Kemp, Sean Kemp played for the Padres. The Padres had not had anybody ever hit for the cycle either.
Yeah, that's interesting. San Diego has been around a lot longer than at least 2 of the other teams, and longer than Toronto even too. More years in the league. And they're considered to be a pitching team and been a pitching park in the last couple of decades. So,
the Padres have already been around over 50 years.
And the Mets just got theirs a couple years ago. I remember hearing. That's actually how I knew this, is because I remember watching and hearing that the Mets and Padres were the last 2, and then the Mets got one.
The Padres are among the leaders of teams that have been no hit many times. And And there is the infamous incident in 1969 when Preston Gomez was the manager of the Padres and Clay Kirby had a no-hitter going into the ninth, and he was lifted for a pinch hitter. If you remember, anybody remembers that. Okay, question number 8. Rogers Hornsby never got a ceremony at the Hall of Fame.
He was pretty not liked anyhow.
Was he still alive at that time, or did they not do it because it was
Yes.
posthumous?
No, he was. I double checked. There were several combined induction ceremonies in the 40s, especially in the latter half of the decade after the war. I think 46 and 47 were inducted together. 48 and 49 were inducted together. Many of those inductees were deceased, but I double checked before I wrote this question. Everybody in 1942 listed here was alive. And everybody here did get to attend an induction ceremony, whether it was the year they were inducted or not, other than Hornsby. Okay, here comes question number 9. 100 years ago, last Saturday, the doubleheader that started the Negro National Leagues here in Indianapolis, the first game was won by the ABCs. You take 2 points if you got that right. The second game was won by the ABCs. They swept the twin bill. Okay, here's where it might get tricky. Except for I know Noel knows this, and I'm disappointed Jerry's not here. She might get a perfect score.
We got the site marker put up there at the home plate.
Yeah. Okay, well, the name of the ballpark was Washington Park. I would also accept West Washington Park or even West Washington Street Park. Any one of those three would have been acceptable. But here's where you earn your stripes. Can anybody, before I show it, tell me they're pretty confident about a final score for either game?
I keep thinking one of them was 4-2, but I may be remembering something else.
Okay. Game 1 was won 4-2, and the second game was won 11-4.
I didn't remember that one.
Okay, so tally up your scores. And again, all you're going to get this time around is bragging rights. Anybody get a perfect 90? Anybody between 80 and 90? How about an 80? 70?
I have 70 on the nose.
You have 70. Anybody get between
Kalon?
Anybody between 70 and 80? Anybody get 4 or 6 points on this last one that could tip the scales?
No, last one helped me. I still only got 48.
Okay, if and Todd is the only one saying he's got a 70. So our returning champion, Todd McDorman, congratulations. Look forward to doing this in person next time.
I missed K-line and I struck out on the Negro League question. I got a big 0 on that one, despite your 4 parts. I guessed wrong every time.
Okay. All right. Well, in your defense, Todd, the Chicago American Giants did go on to win the Negro National League pennant that year. So,
Andrew,
anybody
your
have any questions about any of this before I throw it back?
I was just going to say your questions, I don't know, maybe our experience is similar. I actually got 4 right, which is 4 times my all-time ever.
So this is your all-time high, you're saying?
Oh yeah, by 4 times as much.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I got 4 right instead of just 1, which is my usual.
Okay, so this is your all-time personal best record.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Andrew. You can
Good.
make trivia for me anytime.
Thank you. I'm going to share one last thing on this wall because we were talking about no-hitters.
Yeah.
I was at the Scott Erickson no-hitter in '94, and I got him to sign it a few years after. So game day scorecard, Scott Erickson no-hitter, 427.94. Downside was he no-hit the Brewers, which is why I was there.
Can I
Speaking
follow
of
See
that
my
up?
own team no-hit, but I was at one.
Speaking at being at a no-hitter, there is somebody that is in this meeting today who not only attended a no-hitter, but he walked out before the no-hitter was complete. He left early.
That is true. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Burton had a no-hitter going, although a lot of walks, if I remember, on a bitterly cold day in Wrigley Field in April of 1972. And I had my younger brother with me. And I said, oh man, I got to go. There's no way he's going to get a no-hitter. So we left.
I also attended a lost no-hitter in the sense that it was one of those that I guess got dropped out of the books. Anthony Hawkins pitched against the White Sox in White Sox Park, and it was only 8 innings. So it wasn't a full 9 innings so he didn't get it, but we saw it.
Yeah, and those are the ones that I disagree with, Faye Vincent. If it was a complete game and you only pitched 8, it's still a no-hitter. And I disagree with the fact that those got dropped. So
Well, and we named the next cat Hawkins after that.
Ronnie.
I came within 1 out of pitching a no-hitter
Really?
in Little League.
It counts.
Hit on the chalk line, right? I had because there's only 6 innings back then in Little League.
Ronnie,
Yeah.
is that the same game? Hawkins pitching against the White Sox. Even though he gave up no hits, they lost the game 4-0 because of fielding errors.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's the game.
yeah.
That's why there was no bottom of the 9th,
yeah, so that's a complete
because
game.
the White Sox were winning
Right.
despite it being a no-hitter. Yeah.
Well, it proves that baseball is definitely a team game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Todd, I'm gonna throw this back. I don't know if is everybody seeing a picture of the ABCs?
We are, with Oscar in the middle.
Yeah, I didn't know if my screen was still up or not. So, okay. Todd, do you have it again?
Andrew,
I do.
Okay.
Andrew, that
Yes.
first picture you showed us with the mask,
Yes.
what year was that?
Had to be 1918.
1918.
1918. Thank you.
Let me get it back here real quick. This is taken during the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918, and as you can see, the batter clearly has a mask on his face. He also has one in his hip pocket, and it might be hard for you to tell, but if you scrutinize this photograph a little more clearly, the catcher's wearing a mask under his mask. The umpire has a mask under his mask, and everyone in the background, and the men in the suits and the spectators, everybody is wearing a mask.
Wow.
So I came across this the other day, and I said, I know what picture I'm going to use to start the trivia.
Yeah, do you know much more about it? I'll admit that I half thought you had doctored up the picture because I was unaware of them wearing masks. I've been watching.
Your video cut out. I didn't catch what you said.
Is there any other detail you have about the picture? Sorry.
Can't hear.
Oh, yeah. Do you have any other details? Do you know who was playing?
I do not. I don't think this is a major league game, simply because of the venue. It looks like it's at a municipal park or maybe it could be a college game even. I tried to do a little bit of research into it. I got sidelined and never got back on track. I don't know where. I do know the source that I got this from was CBS News. They had it dated 1918, just simply baseball players during the flu epidemic. That was their caption. But I will look at a little bit more into it. And if I learn anything, I'll pass it along either through the email or maybe at our next meeting. But I have a feeling it's probably a semi-pro or a collegiate game, something like that.
I've been rewatching Ken Burns's baseball, and I think I'm in episode 4, but I just got through the period of when the flu epidemic would have been. And while he mentioned how many people died from the flu, I was surprised there wasn't any reference to it in relation to baseball. Of course, I'm surprised only because of the current circumstances.
Yeah.
And so I really have very little knowledge of what baseball did during that time.
See, I think in 1918, the season ended early because of the war. And the season, I don't think really broke out until the fall of 18, really heavily in the United States. And then it continued into 19, I think.
Okay.
Might be why. It didn't really affect the season, I don't think, here.
Okay. I didn't know. I mean, I knew that was the season, but I didn't know where it fell. So that's interesting. Thanks. Trent, did you have anything else here at the end?
Me?
I think right now, I just want to thank Todd. Thank you again for putting together this meeting and the presentation and answering everybody's questions. And Andrew, of course, thank you for developing the trivia for this meeting, especially given that Ronnie was able to score a personal best. I mentioned in the chat that I was scared of coming up with a big fat 0, but luckily I actually scored a few points here and there, and so I don't have to go home completely embarrassed after the trivia round. I think that given all that, so I'm glad everyone could get together. I'll send a recap to everyone in the next couple days. But in the meantime, everyone, please stay safe. Oh, actually, one quick question. Todd, you said were you recording the meeting?
It is recording. These files are really big, and so how it gets shared is an issue. It will be far too big to go through an email. I know we have an internal file system. I don't know if I can share it to anyone who doesn't have a wabash.edu address. I'll have to look at that. I'm sure something like Dropbox would work. I'm just not, I'm not as versed in that. But there is recording. Yeah,
Todd, yeah, I can tell you how to process it to make it smaller.
Oh, okay.
Okay, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
Todd, could I ask you?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, just quick comment. We have a new member among us. I've noticed on the sign-ins. His name is Andrew Heckroth, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mm-hmm. He just joined this week, and I just sent him an invitation to all of this last night. So kudos to him for not being shy and jumping into the Oscar Charleston chapter. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Real quick, one last thing. I found our picture. It is pictured. It is the Southern California Winter League from the 1918-19 Spanish flu season. Wow. So that makes sense that, like Andrew said, the venue, Southern California Winter League, plus the fact that it was played later than the regular season. Yeah. This does say the Major League season was cut short, not because of the flu, but due to World War I. So,
Todd, before
how did you find that?
I did a reverse image search and then clicked on articles where you can copy the link of the picture and it brings up, it searches for the photo itself. But I can send the link along.
No, I'm just curious about the process.
Yeah, I did a reverse image search. It was the quickest way.
Todd, could I ask you whether or not, you and whoever else was involved in this, that did these presentations on Zoom here, be open to doing it for our Fort Wayne chapter, if we arrange it or work with, I'm not able to set up a Zoom meeting yet technically, but going to talk to our president. I don't know if he can or not, but you'd be willing to do this again, or whoever else would want to join. I'm sure some of the people in our group would enjoy seeing this. And
sure, I could reprise this in some way or something different. I can also share with you all details on how you could arrange your own meeting. Zoom operates in a couple different ways. You can have, there's free Zoom accounts. I think you may be limited to 40 to 50 minutes in that. I can't recall. I know I have a kind of a professional type account, because of the teaching, teaching and research elements of it. But there are free accounts available as well. But I'm happy to talk to you about that. I'm not sure the best way to get a hold of you outside of this.
My brother can contact me.
Or you can share your email in the chat real quick if you wanted to. And talk
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, anyone who wants to put their emails out, also anyone who's not on our emailing list. So if I did not send if I send an email and you were not on the mass list, then please let me know and I'll make sure to add your name to the list for future reference. And I think, so I guess Ronnie and Todd, and maybe I'll connect all three of us via an email after this so that we can try to figure out the best way to share a link that's not overwhelmingly huge to this presentation in case any of our members who might have missed the presentation can catch this, or at least their favorite bits and pieces of it. If there's no additional comments, I would say, I guess we're gonna adjourn, and until next time, I hope we can all maybe see each other in person, but either way, let's hope we have some baseball here in the near future, and I look forward to just catching up with everyone in whatever medium that might be. So thank you so much for everyone for attending, and it's great to see you all.
Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you.
Trent, if you and Todd want to just hang on for a minute,
Oh yeah,
you can just do it now,
perfect.
if that's what you, Todd.
Yeah, that works fine. I'm trying to find the button to stop recording though, so we won't get all this.